It's so stupid, it's positively brilliant.
The Brain Force Podcast.
Positively brilliant absolutely has to go to the deal. And I say the deal because I feel like it's two entities involved.
Yes.
Spotify and Joe Rogan.
100%.
You know, the reason I have to include both of them is because, all right, the reason I love podcasts, right, is because podcasts elevate everything that made the world of radio great.
Talk to me.
Well, when you're in the audio business, to me, the thing that makes any audio business great, radio or podcast, is personalities.
Okay.
I don't give a fuck. Everything else is secondary. I don't care. Like, I don't care what anybody tells me. It's kind of like the argument, you know, Michael Jordan was trying to make with Jerry Krause. Like when Jerry Krause talks about management and the organization.
Still need the players.
Bro, you need the players.
Yeah.
Who's in them fucking jerseys?
Yep.
Okay? If you don't believe me, go play an old fucking video game when Michael Jordan wasn't allowed to be in the video games because of his deal with Nike or whatever, and tell me that basic ass 23 with the ball head wasn't trash. All right, you wouldn't want that. All right, you want that Jordan on the back. You want that MJ. So in radio, regardless of what kind of company you have, whether it's a podcast company, a radio company, you need talent. And a lot of times, these companies don't like to invest in talent. When it comes to radio turned into a jukebox. And talent became secondary. And that's why I think podcasts have grown the way that they've grown.
To all the young people listening that don't know what a jukebox is or have never used a jukebox.
A jukebox is basically your iPod, but it's big as hell, and it sits on the floor in like local juke joints. Now I don't know how to explain what a juke joint is.
Just a bar. There was like that machine in the bar that you put $1 and you could play a few songs.
You could play music, exactly.
Yeah. And you're saying that like radio kind of transitioned from having these personalities that would talk a lot to this place where you would just play different songs. So then the radio station stopped investing in personalities as much because I guess they weren't as important.
Absolutely. And that's why,
kind of weirdly, it's almost like radio experienced the AI takeover before people at factories or people at fast food restaurants. In that regard, where it's like, oh shit, we can get a robot to do your job for you. Boom.
Are in certain cases, because the only place that a lot of radio stations still care about talent is morning drive. Right. So, but when you have a great morning show, all you got to do is syndicate that morning show throughout the country, which I'm not arguing about. I'm not complaining about. I'm a nationally syndicated radio personality.
Right.
Great for me. But what about the next Charlamagne? What about the next Bobby Bones? What about the next, Elvis Duran? When Joe Rogan, when we was on his podcast, I think that was last year, and Joe Rogan said he feels like I'm the last great radio personality. I'm the last great radio star. That kind of hurt. You know what I'm saying? Even though it feels good to be that, but it still hurt because I'm like, damn, this is my industry. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to see my industry just, go to the wayside because people aren't doing what Spotify did with Joe Rogan, which is invest in top tier talent. It's not rocket science. If you're a fucking owner of an NFL team, if you're an owner of an NBA team, you're an owner of an NHL team, you're an owner of a TV network, you're an owner of a fucking movie industry, you go try to get the best person. And you don't penny pinch with the best person. You cut the best person the fuck off. And then you sit back and watch your stocks go up 11% like Spotify did yesterday. Simple. Like, why do we complicate this thing, man? So for me, I just think that it's brilliant on Spotify's end that they recognize top tier talent and that they invest in top tier talent. And it's brilliant on Joe Rogan's end because he didn't have to do this, right? You look at a guy who last year he made $30 million off live shows, off ad revenue, off what he does on YouTube. Literally, Forbes said he made $30 million.
I thought that was just off the podcast, 30 mil.
Yeah, it said it was just off the podcast.
So not even including the live shows, not including his equity in the brands that he owns.
They said his live shows, ad revenue, and what he makes off YouTube. His podcast made $30 million.
The podcast made $30 million. Yeah.
The podcast, not him. Joe Rogan's podcast made $30 million. So that's not something he had to do unless Spotify came with a life-changing number, which clearly they did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that's what you do when you're investing in that kind of talent. But I respect Joe because 11 years he's been doing this podcast. Some people get comfortable. You know, some people are good with their spot. They're not thinking about what that next level is or how they can get to that next level. Clearly he's thinking like that. You know what I'm saying? So I just think it's a positively brilliant move from both parties. And I just really commend Spotify for investing in talent, because I just feel like that's what the audio business has to do. I think that's what radio has to continue to do if they want to be relevant. I think that, you know, these radio companies that are getting into the podcast space, you have to invest into these podcasters. Like you just have to. There's podcasters out here that are bigger than 90% of all radio personalities out right now. So why
100%.
wouldn't you invest in that talent? So I just think it was a brilliant move.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was brilliant, and I agree for both parties. Like, let's start with Spotify. You know, what is Spotify at the end of the day, right? It's an audio platform, right? It wants to be, I would assume, the place that everybody goes to listen to anything. And right now, I think that they've got the music part down, right? Like when I go listen to music, I turn on Spotify. It's just easier. I feel like the algorithms are better for like choosing music, etc. But there are other things that we listen to outside of music. Matter of fact, we might listen to podcasts more than music. So if they're going to be an audio platform, they got to get into the podcast space. Now, in order to get into the podcast space, you need to qualify yourself as a place for podcasting. There is no better way to do that than having the biggest podcast in history on your platform.
100%.
So they invested, when you think about it, they invested in brand. They invested
100%.
in their own brand. They bought brand. When you get the Joe Rogan Experience onto your platform, now you're a podcasting platform. You have
100%.
immediately become a podcasting platform. And so I thought that was brilliant from them business-wise. And then also from Joe, I thought it was brilliant the fact that he said, I don't work for Spotify. They are licensing my content.
Oh, whoa. Yes,
that's something that we got to point out. And let's explain that to the people. Explain that difference between that.
I mean, there was a few things about the deal, right? The fact that, because I was reading up on it, I read up on it a lot last night, but when he said that they didn't buy Joe Rogan's company, they bought Joe Rogan's show, which to me is brilliant within itself.
License the show for 3 years.
License Joe's show, but they didn't buy his company. If you look at a lot of other deals Spotify did, they actually bought the company. So that means that they own the IP. So like Gimlet, Anchor, Bill Simmons and The Ringer, like those investments were made into an actual company. This was a licensing deal where they made an investment into a show and a singular individual.
But explain the difference between owning the show and licensing it.
Yeah.
Licensing just means that they have the right to distribute it exclusively.
That's it.
That's all.
They don't own it.
They don't own it. You get it back at the end of that licensing deal. It's still yours. Right. They're essentially leasing your show like you would lease an apartment. So they're leasing
That's exactly what they're doing.
Your show, or like you lease a car, etc. And the genius thing about it is, let's say Joe doesn't like this after 3 years, he gets right back to what he's doing. Let's say he does like it after 3 years and he sees the value that he's brought to Spotify. Well, shit, crank up that deal. Let's run it back, but I continue to own this. Yeah. I thought it was such a brilliant thing. Now, I know a lot of people are going to go, well, yeah, you could reduce the amount of people that are going to go over there. You could reduce the amount of people that are listening. Spotify, I would say, is not like Luminary or one of these like fledgling startups that got a lot of money but didn't even really know what they were doing. They want to be like the Netflix of podcasting. People already have Spotify. It's a very popular listening platform.
286 million monthly subscribers.
And furthermore, you don't need to pay for Spotify if you don't want to. So if you want to listen to the Joe Rogan Experience for free, like you were listening to on Apple Music, you can do that. Spotify will insert ads, just like Rogan had ads on his thing. So I don't think he's given up that much like efficiency of searching for content. Like, yeah, people have to download the Spotify app or whatever. But yeah. I think that the way they're rolling it out, which is fucking brilliant, is... And I think you were explaining this to me last night, right? They're not doing a full transfer until January 1st, right?
Yeah, so September 1st, his catalog will go over there.
September 1st, all the back episodes go over there.
All the back catalog, because he's giving up all 11 years of his catalog. So all the catalog will be there on September 1st. And then he'll be exclusively coming out on Spotify, I think, January 1st.
So now you have, basically, Joe Rogan has from now until January 1st to get every single person that listens to it regularly to just hit download on the Spotify app. That's literally all you have 6 months to hit download on the Spotify app. I mean, it is, and to be honest, is a good move by Spotify because there's some iconic interviews on Rogan. Like if you want to hear the Elon Musk one, if you want to hear, he's like, the way I look at his podcast is kind of like, remember Encyclopedia Britannica? Remember when we were growing up, we had that shit? It was all those books so you could look up anything.
Absolutely.
And I feel like he's had all these experts on his podcast. So that's the new generation's Encyclopedia Britannica. It's like, you want to hear Killer Mike talk about the black experience in America? Well, there's an iconic interview right there. You want to hear these people talk about that? So, and dude, to go make fuck you money, to make like generational wealth, shit.
And that's the thing, right? Like, yeah, it's risk involved, right? It's risk involved when you leave Apple. It's risk involved when you take all your content off YouTube. Apple makes up 60% of all podcast listening audience. But yo, at some point you got to bet on yourself, right? You Joe fucking Rogan, right?
Yep.
So if you got a cult like following, and you know you believe in your people and you believe in your audience, they should follow you. But guess what? Even if they don't, you still won. What the fuck? You walked away with 100+ M's at the end of the goddamn day. You're
How much
52
is it?
years old.
How much is it? The deal, do you know?
I think that Joe Rogan up front probably got 125 to 150 million. And I think on the back end, he stands to make probably another 150.
Explain that to me, the back end thing.
Well, I'm sure that he has, you know, bonuses. I'm sure that he has bounties to where, you know, it's people can go to Spotify and say, hey, I'm downloading Spotify specifically for the Joe Rogan podcast. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure that they'll be able to see the amount of people who signed up to Spotify specifically for the Joe Rogan podcast. It's kind of like the same deal Howard Stern had with Sirius Satellite Radio. You know what I'm saying? Like he got a certain amount up front, but then he had a whole bunch in stock, and then he had a whole bunch of other bonuses and incentives and things like that. I'm sure Joe still has the same type of deal. I can't see him getting no more. I can't see him getting any less than 125 up front, though, because just for everything he gave up.
Because think about it, like if he was making $30 million a year on a podcast and it's a 3-year deal, it doesn't make sense for him to do it for only 120 because he was going to make 100. He was going to make 90 in that amount of time, or the podcast could grow in that amount of time and maybe he ends up making 120. I feel like it's got to be double what he would have made in those 3 years at the current rate, bare minimum. So it's like, I think it's got to be at least 180. And maybe over 200 mil with those incentives and stuff that you were talking about total.
You think 180 up front?
I think it's got to be guaranteed 180 because he's going to make 90 in those 3 years anyway. You got to give me some incentive. You got to double me up if I'm going to go.
We don't know what he was doing prior though. Like 30 million might have been his best year. Which is the number you should negotiate on.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Don't you sell a business based on like 10x what your revenue is in the last year, something like that? There's like, because you assume that, well, he's not selling his whole business, but you assume growth. Yeah. So if you only have it for 3 years, maybe you sell it at 2x or something. I don't know. Somebody way smarter than me can figure that out. But
yeah, I think 5 years. I think it's like 5 years, 30. That's why I say I can't see him getting no less than 120, 150 up front, and he probably stands to make like another 100, 150 on the back end over time.
Now,
but we could be completely wrong.
Totally.
But the Wall Street Journal reported that it was definitely over 100.
It has to be 100%.